Bonsoir à tous. Donc, je me présente, je m'appelle Marc Mézard, je suis le directeur de l'École normale supérieure. C'est avec un grand plaisir que je vous accueille ici ce soir. Donc, pour cet événement du quatrième volume des lettres de Samuel Beckett, donc événement organisé pour notre plus grand plaisir avec le Centre culturel irlandais. Que je salue. Donc tout le monde sait que Beckett a été lecteur à l'école normale pendant 2 années, je crois. Marc Poré va faire un bref rappel. Je partage aussi avec Beckett un petit quelque chose, parce que je sais que quand il était ici, il jouait dans l'équipe de rugby avec les étudiants de l'école. Et donc, comme j'ai aussi participé en montant à cette équipe de rugby, voilà, ça fait un petit lien. Ce n'était pas la même époque, je vous rassure, un petit écart d'âge. Voilà, je ne veux pas du tout prendre de votre temps. Je sais qu'il va y avoir, je voudrais laisser du temps pour la partie plus scientifique. Donc, je vous souhaite à tous une très bonne soirée. Et je vais passer la parole à Marc Poré. Merci.
Merci infiniment, Monsieur le Directeur. Now let me begin by giving credit where credit is due. That means rendering unto Daniel that which is Dan's. It was Daniel Gunn's idea in the first place. He approached people at the école, among whom was Peter Bierman, on the grounds that there could be no better suited place for the launch in Paris of the 4th and final volume of Samuel Beckett's letters than the École normale supérieure. It's not for me to say so, obviously, but it does make perfect sense, historically and intellectually speaking. A quick reminder of the facts, very quick, for I feel like carrying coals to Newcastle. Porter de l'eau à la rivière, as everyone, I'm sure, is fully conversant with all of this. Beckett taught English at the École in the years 1928 to 1930, when the directeur was a renowned mathematician, Ernest Vessiot. His workload, mind you, was not overwhelming. He had 1 conscrit doing an English degree, Georges Pelorson, and 2 agrégatives, one of whom, Émile de Lavenay, spent most of the year in Dublin anyway, teaching French. Tuition, what's more, was pretty relaxed, which left Beckett plenty of time to make the most of Paris and of the artistic and literary avant-garde, with his Irish colleague, the witty and knowledgeable Thomas McGreevy, showing him around, introducing him to Joyce, no doubt the most decisive encounter. And to begin, a long-lasting friendship with Jean Beaufret, a student of philosophy. Philosophy, what else, here at the École. Being the lecteur d'anglais de l'École may well have caused Beckett to champ at the bit, owing to the British spin on the denomination. This was probably when he began rehearsing his celebrated au contraire. But barring the national angle, again, how apposite. When he was not teaching or playing rugby, and Marc Mézard stole my cue, 20 minutes at full throttle, after which il s'écroulait dans les pâquerettes. End of quote. Tennis, the tin whistle in his turn, when he was not drinking late at night in cafes, le Maillot at the corner of the Rue Gay-Lussac and the Boule Miche, now a McDonald's, le cochon de lait, le bœuf sur le toit, la closerie des lilas, drinking what? Well, dry white wine and, I must say, a variety of other drinks. Gevrey Chambertin, and, this is a quote, the potent, unpleasant Mandarin Curaçao, the ubiquitous Fernet Branca that went to your head and settled your stomach and was like a short story by Mauriac. Oxygéné and real Porto. Yes, real Porto. Well, when he was not doing all that, Beckett read Descartes, St. Augustine, Keats, Post, Schopenhauer, and so on and so forth. He read for and to Joyce. He read for himself, beginning his creative and critical writings. Dante, Bruno, Vico, Joyce, Assumption, the 98line poem Horoscope, which won him a prize. Last but not least, the Proust monograph, completed in London on his way back to Trinity. Oh, that memorable first sentence. The Proustian equation is never simple. I personally would give a lot to be able to pen just that one perfect line. Decisive years indeed. And to touch very briefly now on the subject of the persistence of Beckett at the école, I will switch over to French. Il continue à y avoir à l'école, de loin en loin, un lecteur, une lectrice irlandais. Des pièces de Beckett se donnent assez régulièrement dans le théâtre de l'école. Des archicubes de l'école, Jean-Michel Rabaté, entre autres, publient sur Beckett. Un colloque, Beckett Between, a été organisé à l'école et au Centre culturel irlandais les 20 et 21 février 2010, à l'instigation d'Éclat et de Dunluth Bird, qui a été maître de langue ici. Beckett y est enseigné. Et puis, tous les ans, en accueillant les élèves, je leur dis « Allez au cours des lecteurs. Ne passez pas à côté du futur Beckett, du prochain Paul Celan. Vous pourriez vous en mordre les doigts. » Enfin, last but not least, il y a une salle Beckett au rez-de-chaussée du bâtiment, ici, à côté de la salle Paul Celan. Une salle dotée de hautes fenêtres, au travers desquelles brille le soleil, having no alternative on the nothing new. Sur un des murs figure la formule en français « déjà essayé »,« déjà échoué », peu importe. Essaie encore, échoue encore, échoue mieux. Une salle, il n'en faut pas davantage. Donnez-moi une salle, séjour où des corps vont cherchant chacun son dépeupleur. Enfermez-moi dans un poêle chauffé et j'élabore une méthode, une pensée, une langue. Résultat, l'équation beckettienne n'est jamais simple. Mais ce n'est pas à l'école qu'on s'en plaindra. Merci beaucoup.
Mesdames, Messieurs, chers collègues et amis, parlant au nom de l'équipe éditoriale, je vous remercie d'être venus partager notre joie. Avec la parution du quatrième et dernier volume des Lettres de Samuel Beckett, nous arrivons au terme d'un projet amorcé il y a une bonne vingtaine d'années. Projet qui a permis au monde des lettres de découvrir un nouveau Samuel Beckett, en révélant ce qu'a été pour lui le long processus, la série d'étapes de ses créations littéraires, romans, pièces de théâtre, pièces radiophoniques, mais surtout l'histoire d'une évolution parallèle, le passage de l'intériorité à la collaboration. Comment Samuel Beckett, le solitaire, s'est frayé un chemin vers ce que j'ose appeler les faiseurs, éditeurs, metteurs en scène, acteurs et actrices, traducteurs. Et cette collaboration ne s'est jamais terminée. En août 1889, quelques mois seulement avant sa mort, il écrivait à Alain Bosquet pour expliquer qu'il n'avait pas d'inédit à lui proposer, ajoutant « il n'y en aura plus ». Mais ce 4e volume, à lui seul, mérite notre attention. Si d'un côté, il nous transmet le récit d'un homme en proie aux effets de l'inévitable déclin physique, de l'autre, il nous révèle, pour la 2e fois de sa vie, Beckett, le résistant, aussi discret cette fois que l'autre, passant outre aux difficultés du corps, privilégiant comme toujours l'esprit, à la recherche comme toujours de la parole. Ceci nous vaut une série de lettres d'une densité et d'une variété étonnantes. Jusqu'à la fin, nous avons affaire à un écrivain de première grandeur. Avant de terminer, je me permettrai un petit jeu de mots. Vous connaîtrez bien entendu ces beaux vers de Rimbaud. « Oisive jeunesse a tout asservi, par délicatesse, j'ai perdu ma vie. » Autrement dit, une petite défaite. Je proposerai à la place une petite victoire. Active vieillesse, à Sam asservi, par pure hardiesse, j'ai sauvé ma vie. Et pour terminer, ceci seulement, vive Samuel Beckett. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, speaking on behalf of the editorial team, I want to thank you all for coming to share in our joy. With the publication of the 4th and final volume of the Letters of Samuel Beckett, we've reached the end of a project which began more than 20 years ago, a project which has allowed the literary world to discover a new Samuel Beckett by revealing how he experienced the long process, the many stages of his creative work. Novels, plays for theatre, plays for radio, but above all, the history of a parallel evolution, the shift from an inner world to the world of collaboration, how the solitary Samuel Beckett forged a connection with what I might call the doers, publishers, directors, actors, translators, and that collaboration never ended. As late as August '89, a few months before his death, he wrote to Alain Bossier to apologize for not having no new unpublished material to offer him, adding only, there won't be any more. But this 4th volume on its own warrants our attention. If on the one hand it tells the story of a man facing the effects of inevitable physical decline, on the other it shows us, for the second time in his life, Beckett the résistant, once again discreet, moving beyond the troubles of the body, as always giving pride of place to the word, and the mind searching as always for the word. What this brings us is a series of letters astounding in their density and variety. Right to the end, we're in the presence of a great writer. But one more thing to say, long live Samuel Beckett.
I didn't actually introduce, this is George Craig. For those of you who don't know, I'm Dan Gunn, and I'll do the further introductions in a minute. Can people hear me okay? Am I?
A little bit louder would be good.
A little bit louder, I'll try. I have a little speech prepared, but as I was coming in today, I thought the following. Well, firstly, I just want to say we've made it. For those who have been active supporters, participants in this project, you will know that it was never that sure. If there's one thing that letters give you over biography, it's the sense of process. Biography is always written after the event or after the main event, perhaps, and it gives a sense and can give a very false sense of that it was inevitable, that it had to be that way, the life had to happen that way. So those of you who've read the letters will remember that there's several letters written by Beckett to friends saying, I'm thinking of calling this play something to do with Godot, maybe En attendant Godot, but I don't think Godot is the right term, it's maybe not the right name. And then he learns that Jouanneau had published a play with that name in it, differently spelled. So the play that's perhaps the most canonical play of the 20th century, Beckett hesitated about that. It didn't have to be that way. Lives don't have to work out this way, and our project certainly didn't have to work out this way, but it did work out, and we're here to celebrate that. Thank you for joining us. So ladies and gentlemen, mesdames, messieurs, Let me first thank Monsieur Mézières and Marc Boré of the École Normale Supérieure for their splendid welcome and for this great setting. And in anticipation, let me thank Sinead McA, excuse me for mashing your McA, it doesn't look like that on the page, of the Irish Cultural Centre for allowing us to extend our evening by drawing what seems an entirely appropriate link between these two institutions, the one French, the other Irish, a link that ties up so much of what this evening means to us. On the 1st of November 1983, 3 years before his death, Samuel Beckett wrote to an old friend, Douglas Graham, who had been headmaster of Portora Royal School, where he himself had been a pupil. He writes, "Up and down the long, crooked, straight, we potter somehow on, and no words left to help." In letter after letter, Beckett figures his life as a long, crooked straight. It should really be no surprise to me that our own road, that of the editors of this edition of Beckett's letters, should have been that of a long, crooked straight. A long, crooked straight which has nonetheless led us to this final celebration. I want to remind you of just a few of the landmarks that have marked our way. Since Samuel Beckett asked Martha Fesenfeld to take care of the publication of his letters, more than 30 years have passed. Lois Overbeck joined Martha early on and has proved tireless in her efforts to bring the project to completion, bringing the not inconsiderable resources of Emory University behind her in support of our work. Time has taken its toll on all of us, and it is with regret that in saluting my two pioneer colleagues, co-editors, I have to regret their absence here this evening. In the early 1990s, through the intermediary of the great literary editor Catherine Carver, I was introduced to Marty and Lois here in Paris. It quickly became clear to me that a lot of assistance would be required this end, Paris end, not least on and not least in the French language. At that point, we may not have been so acutely aware of the fact, but around 35% of Beckett's letters were written in French. Beckett himself was one of the greatest translators of the 20th century. I knew that there was only one person ideally suited to the immensely tricky job of turning Beckett's French into English, or into Anglo-Irish perhaps, and that was my former tutor at Sussex University, George Craig, on my right. As it happened, George had, in 1995, just taken retirement from university, so I thought this would be a nice retirement job for him. He agreed to join our team, having little notion of just what he was letting himself in for. 35% may not sound like very much, but when the corpus is close to 20,000 letters, and when the vast majority of the letters are not typed, but written in Beckett's famously illegible handwriting, you can begin to get a sense of the magnitude of the task that awaited us. We would not have brought this project to completion without a lot of help from a lot of friends. I'm delighted to say that several of them are present here this evening. Central among them is Samuel Beckett's nephew, Edward, who runs the Beckett estate. It's upon his shoulders that the job of working with us fell after the death of Beckett's beloved publisher and friend, Jérôme Landon. Edward has never claimed it to be easy, for what may be of intense literary interest to the rest of us is often equally intensely personal for him and his extended family. He has stayed the course with us and will be breathing a sigh of relief this evening with us, I'm sure. From early on, I knew that we needed a solid and supportive publisher behind us, and for this reason I turned to Cambridge University Press. For 20 years, the press has indeed been solidly behind us, first through its humanities chief officer, Andrew Brown, who sadly did not live long enough to see our project to completion, and then through its senior editor, Linda Bree, who has offered us unfailingly excellent advice, and who I'm glad to say is also here with us this evening. Few are the presses which would have provided such a complete panoply of support on everything from copy editing to grant raising to marketing. Among the numerous other people it behoves me to thank, apart from my partner Christina, who has put up with me and the, I hope, almost necessarily obsessive attention that I've devoted to our project, three stand out particularly, not least because I believe they're all present here. The first is the president of the American University of Paris, Celeste Schenk, who has been a champion of our project from the outset. The more than 50 AUP students who have worked with me on research into the volumes have their own stories to tell. Without them, and without the institutional backing I've received over the years, we would not be here this evening. I feel it's important to stress this, since academia is increasingly focused on instant, or at least quick, returns and rewards. And this, when so little of genuine intellectual interest in the world of literature comes quickly or easily. In thanking Celeste, I'm also thanking all my colleagues who have given me advice and shared their expertise, as well as students who have put up with me as I drone on about this or that aspect of our project. The second is the American poet Anne Attique, the widow of the painter Avigdor Arica. Together, Anne and Avigdor were about the closest friends Sam Beckett had in the last 30 years of his life. I knew that if what we were preparing and then publishing could pass muster with the extremely demanding and exacting critic that was Avigdor Arica, then we must be not going too far wrong. I knew that if Anne could say, and she did, that certain passages of Beckett's letters were as beautiful as anything in his published text, then we were really making a contribution. I'd like to thank Anne for all her support over the years, not least in letting us use the wonderful drawing by Avigdor that is on the cover of the volume, volume 4, and actually on your programme as well. And through Anne, I wish to thank all of Beckett's friends and acquaintances who have opened their archives and their hearts to us. And last, but certainly not least, I need to thank Gérard Kahn. Most of you may not know this name, but not yet, but soon you will, as it is he who has translated volume 3 of the letters for Gallimard, which will be published before the end of the year, and who will be following that with volume 4. Though it's not in fact for his translating that we, the editors, need to thank Gérard, but for helping us so tirelessly to get the volumes as accurate as they are. Above all, this final one, which I'm sure is our best bit of editing to date. Numerous are the mistranscriptions from which he has saved us with his patient eye. Countless are the footnotes he has helped us fashion into something that, I believe, really do shed an extra light on the letters, and through the letters, on the oeuvre. Thank you, Gérard. I know some of you will be keen to actually get hold of a copy of the book, and they will be on sale at the Irish Cultural Centre, to which we'll be adjourning immediately after this first half of the evening. Just wanted to mention that. So it's time for me now to introduce our readers for the evening. George, you already know, who will read from the French letters among the selection we have made. All the letters that Beckett wrote in French, we will read in French, as they are published in our edition in their original language. Next to him, next to me, sits an actor who will be familiar to most of you and who has graciously agreed to join us and lend his voice to Beckett's voice. I won't try to sum up the illustrious career of Kieran Hines, who comes to us from Belfast via the Glasgow Citizens Theatre, the Royal Shakespeare Company, Peter Brook's troupe here in Paris. I'd have to mention an awful lot of movies and a great number of outstanding TV series. I've just mentioned at least one of my favourites, Rome, where he played Julius Caesar, and many of you, especially perhaps the younger amongst you, will know him from Game of Thrones. Thanks to Kieran for arranging his extremely busy schedule, coming back from America especially, to be with us this evening. Thanks. So, what we've done is to choose extracts that we hope will give a feel for this fourth and final volume of Beckett's letters, that will illuminate the kind of letter writer he was and remained right until the end of his life. Many of the letters we'll read are very short, condensed, just like the work of this period, therefore. We'll read them perhaps a bit slowly since they're often dense, and I'm going to try and give a little bit of context for each one. One aspect of the late Beckett that one can't fail to strike a reader is his generosity. From the moment he gains renown and earns money, he's determined to put both of these at the service of his friends. Many are the people we have met who are helped materially by Beckett. Here's an example that shows a short letter that says a lot about his attitude to his friends. To here, the painter Avigdor Arica, who at this time had not yet become famous and was clearly feeling the pinch. At the end of the letter, Beckett mentions his wife Anne and their daughter Alba, also here present. So George will read the original French, and I should mention that all the translations are by George, that Kieran will be reading. So this is to Avigdor Rica on the 14th of May, 1966.
Cher Avigdor, je t'ai vu fauché en rêve. Ne m'enguirlande pas. Embrasse bien Anne et Alba. Affectueusement, Sam.
Dear Avigdor, in a dream I saw you stony broke. Don't be cross with me. Big kisses for Anne and Alba. Love, Sam.
We framed that letter.
Anne says, you probably can't hear, Anne is here, they framed this letter. They never used the check. So as I was going to say, with this letter came a check. So it was enough for Beckett to have a dream that one of his friends was not doing well for him to get out his checkbook. Literally, a dream. We'll see that this has repercussions when he's awarded the Nobel Prize in 1969. At the end of 1970, 1 year after the awarding of the Nobel, Beckett reads an article in a German newspaper by his own publisher, Siegfried Unseld, a man whose judgment he trusts. It paints a grim picture of the living conditions of Juna Barnes, the author of Nightwood, whom Beckett had met in the 1930s when Barnes was living in Paris. So this is how Beckett reacts when he reads this article. This is sometime before 22nd of December 1970.
Dear Judah Barnes, I read with distress of your difficulties in a recent Frankfurter Allgemein. May I help you financially? Please accept. Sincerely, Samuel Beckett.
When Barnes responds that all assistance would indeed be welcome, Beckett writes again on the 5th of January 1971, start of the new year. And please note the way that he tries, this is typical, he tries to alleviate the burden that gift giving can generate.
Dear Juna Barnes, thanks for your letter of January 2nd. I have written to New Haven for the money to be sent to you. I think the exact sum is $3,375. It may not be available for a few weeks, so it is good to know that you are not in immediate need. Thank you for leaving me free to do this. All best through the year now upon us. Yours ever, Sam Beckett.
The encouragement that Beckett gives to his friends is not only financial. Even more important, perhaps, is his encouragement of their work. And this word work is the crucial one. Over and over, when his friends are in trouble, the writers, artists, musicians, he encourages them to get back to work. Here is a wonderful example of this to the living novelist that he may have liked above all others, Robert Pinget. It's worth mentioning that Pinget had recently won the Prix des Critiques in 1963 for L'Inquisitoire, and his novel Quelqu'un had won the 1965 Prix Femina. So this is 26th of May 1966 to Robert Pinget.
Cher Robert, je suis trop mal fichu pour pouvoir répondre utilement à ton dernier mot, attendant de nous voir. Je rentre à la fin du mois. Tu as tort de débiner ton travail. On n'est pas des gens de lettres. Si on se donne tout ce mal fou, ce n'est pas pour le résultat, mais parce que c'est le seul moyen de tenir le coup sur cette foutue planète. Avec ce besoin-là, beaucoup de problèmes. Mais pas de problème. Tu l'as peut-être un peu perdu, mais il reviendra. Et tu l'en refoutras de toutes ces questions de valeur. Je crois que ces histoires de prix et autres à côté ne t'ont rien valu et qu'elles peuvent très bien être pour quelque chose dans l'état où tu te sens. Laisse tomber tout ça. Cesse de te relire. Remets-toi au travail. Nous ne saurons jamais ce que nous valons, ni les uns ni les autres, et c'est la dernière question à se poser. Moi, en tout cas, j'aime ce que tu as fait et espère très fort que tu vas continuer. Affectueusement, Sam.
Dear Robert, I'm in too bad a way to be able to respond usefully to your last note. Let's wait till we meet. I'm coming back at the end of the month. You are wrong to run down your work. We are not literati. If we take such dire pains, it is not for the result, but because that is the only way to keep going on this wretched planet. With that kind of need, a great deal of misery, but no problems. Maybe you have lost it a bit, but it will come back and leave you once again not giving a tinker's curse for any of these questions of value. I think that all this business about prizes and other perks has done you no good whatever and may well be contributing to the state you feel yourself in. Forget all that. Stop rereading your writing and get back to work. We shall never any of us know what we are worth, and it is the last question we should be asking. I, at any rate, love what you have done and very much hope that you will carry on. Affectionately, Sam.
The debt that Beckett owed to James Joyce is well known. Here, in a letter to Harold Pinter, he's trying to pay back some of that debt, I believe. Coaching Pinter, who's in London at the time, about to stage Joyce's one play, Exiles. As often with Beckett the critic, when he writes of other writers, one can hear him, he is also writing about himself. So this is the 17th of September 1970 to Harold Pinter.
Dear Harold, please forgive delay in writing to you about Exiles. Your changes in the text are very understandable, but I wonder if there is not a purely acting way out of the difficulty whereby they could be dispensed with. I feel the clue to the production is apartness, as much stage as possible, as often as possible, between the actors. And when they have to come close, it is reluctantly, and to scatter again as soon as the situation permits, all exiled in one another, from one another. Same principle to be applied vocally. Voices abnormally low and from a distance, all speaking and listening more to themselves than to the others. Similarly for set. Elements isolated apart from one another. And no doubt this would create difficulties on other levels, and I don't suggest it should be enforced systematically throughout the three acts. I propose it simply as a predominant mood and as a means of negotiating the thinner ice. I'm seeing the eye surgeon next week and hope he will take on the first eye without further delay. Affectionately to you all, Sam.
And here is Beckett on Pinter's own work. Note the wording, which is in this letter of 1978, heading towards the extreme condensation that, as we'll see, becomes typical of the later letters. So it's to Harold Pinter, 16th of March, 1978, from Paris to London.
Dear Harold, I am not long back to the usual mess from a blow in Tangier. Hence delay in writing to thank you for betrayal and to say how much I like it. The slow back from all over to in store wrings the heart, and that last look in the shadows after all those in the light to come, a curtain of curtains. Good for you again, dear Harold, and warmest congratulations. Affectionately, Sam.
And here he is again from 2 years later, 1980, when Pinter has sent him his radio play, Family Voices, 6th of October, 1980, from Paris to London.
Dear Harold, many thanks for Family Voices and for how movingly they utter again, by the grace of yours, this obscure distress known as life. How I am? Still struggling feebly with work and the other residue. Love, dear Harold. Sam.
Beckett is often thought of as a somewhat apolitical writer. It's true that he does not join political parties, doesn't get involved in signing petitions usually or striking positions, and in this way is very different from most intellectuals in France in the post-war era. However, when friends or principals are involved, he does not hesitate to take a stand, just as he did in the crucial decision of his life to return to France at the outbreak of World War II and to join the French resistance. Here it is his acquaintance, the Spanish writer Fernando Arrabal, who is in trouble, imprisoned in Franco's Spain for his views. I say note the way because, obviously these were meant to be read, and it's a lot to take in when you're just listening, but do note the way in which Beckett, who normally wishes to separate literature from nations and nationality, here he goes so far as to convince the court that nationality is crucial in this particular case. He goes against his own deeply held beliefs about the deterritorialization of literature. Note too the entirely Beckettian way, right at the end of the letter, that he pleads for clemency in this letter written to the court, because he couldn't himself be there, to the Spanish court that is about to judge Fernando Arrabal in 1967.
Finding myself unable to act as a witness in Fernando Arrabal's trial, I write this letter hoping that it will be brought to the knowledge of the court and that it will make the court more sensitive to the exceptional human and artistic value of the man they are about to judge. They are going to try a Spanish writer who, in the brief span of 10 years, has raised himself to the first rank of dramatists today, and by this dint of a profoundly Spanish talent. Wherever his plays are performed, and they are performed everywhere, Spain is there. It is on this already admirable past that I invite the court to reflect before passing judgment, and on the following as well. Arrabal is young. He is fragile, physically and emotionally. He will have to suffer much to give us what he still has to give. To inflict on him the penalty demanded by the prosecution is not only to punish a man, but to put into question all of his work to come. If fault there is, let it be seen in the light of his past great merit and his future great promise, and thus be pardoned. May Fernando Arrabal be returned to his own torment.
And indeed, Arrabal was released from prison. And here, much briefer, from 1972, is how Beckett reacts to the news that his plays are being put on in South Africa. This is to Jenny Sheridan at Curtis Brown, his agent in London, on the 28th of February 1972.
Dear Mrs. Sheridan, please refuse permission for production of Endgame by this Pretoria Theatre and all future proposals from South Africa to present my work before segregated audiences. Yours sincerely, S. Beckett.
I shall now attempt to read a letter from someone to Beckett, followed by his Kieran will read his response to it. I find this difficult, so excuse me if I have a sentimental moment. It's a very difficult letter for me to read, not for technical reasons, but just I find it very moving. 6 weeks after his release from prison, this is what the playwright and future president of the Czech Republic, Václav Havel, writes to Beckett, who has learned that he has written his play Catastrophe for him and has had it performed at the Avignon Festival. We haven't tried to tidy up Havel's style, which is very interestingly mixed, very high register and odd little mistakes, which I think adds an extra piquancy or poignancy to what Havel says. So Havel writes to Beckett, Dear Samuel Beckett, during the dark 50s, when I was 16 or 18 of age, in a country where there were virtually no cultural or other contacts with the outside world, luckily I had the opportunity to read Waiting for Godot. Later, of course, I read all your plays, from among which I seem to have been addressed most forcefully by Happy Days. It may be foolish expression, but I am looking for a better one in vain. From the first, you have been for me a deity in the heavens of spirit. I have been immensely influenced by you as a human being, and in a way as a writer too. There can never disappear the memory of the adventurous search for and finding of spiritual values in the void around me. Even today, after several decades, when I am perhaps older than you were at the time of Godot, I cannot but feel the consequences of my coming across your work. I mention all this to make clearer to you the shock I experienced during my time in prison when, on the occasion of one of her 1-hour visits, allowed 4 times a year, my wife told me in the presence of an obtuse warder that at Avignon there took place a night of solidarity with me, and that you took the opportunity to write and make public for the first time your play Catastrophe. For a long time afterwards, there accompanied me in the prison a great joy and emotion, and helped to live on amidst all the dirt and the baseness. The joy had several dimensions, to which pertained not only the fact that you are for me what I tried to suggest above, but also my awareness that you are not one of those who gives themselves away in small changes, so that your participation in the Avignon event is even more valuable. Thank you very much indeed. You not only helped me in a beautiful way during my prison days, but by doing what you did, you demonstrated your deep understanding for the meaning of affliction, with which those who are not indifferent to the run of things have to take upon themselves occasionally, at the present time, just as they had to do in the past. With best regards and all good wishes, yours ever, Václav Havel, Prague, 17th of April, 1983. And here is how Beckett responds to this letter.
Dear Václav Havel, thank you for your most moving letter. To have helped you, however little, and saluted you and all you stand for, was a moment in my writing life that I cherish. It is I who stand in your debt. I have read and admired your plays in French translation. I send you my heartfelt wishes for better days. Samuel Beckett.
As early as 1966, Beckett learns that his old friend Stuart McGuinness is going to nominate him for the Nobel Prize. Here is how he responds on the 12th of December 1966 to Stuart McGuinness.
Dear Stuart, many thanks for your letter. I am deeply moved by what you tell me. I have no idea how the Nobel works, simply know that there has been talk of me for these past 3 or 4 years. Frankly, I have no ambitions in that direction. It is difficult to regard it as an honor, even supposing an appetite for honor. And as for the money, I have enough for my dwindling needs. But that you should feel like that about me goes to the old heart. I have no plans for London and can only hope that yours for Paris will bring us soon together again. Fondly to you all, Sam.
Beckett is awarded the prize, as you know, despite his wishes, and it does indeed put him in all sorts of difficulty. He knows he cannot refuse the prize, as Jean-Paul Sartre did, a gesture far too histrionic and that would be letting down his friends and his publishers. But what he does is to try and see if he could accept the prize without the money. When this proves impossible, he writes to his publisher, Jérôme Landon, who is the one who eventually goes and accepts the prize on his behalf in Stockholm. You should know, just for this letter, that La Retourne is an association that financially assists stage artists in need, and that TCD is Trinity College Dublin. So this is to Jérôme Landon, his friend, his publisher, his go-to man for anything that needs done in the world, on the 20th of November 1969 from Nabeul in Tunisia, where he was basically hiding from everyone, especially from the press.
Cher Jérôme, pour le fric, je ne sais pas encore ce que nous devons en faire. J'avais conçu l'audacieux projet de le donner en bloc et publiquement pour couper court à la Retourne et autres débiles mondaines, à la bibliothèque de TCD, esprit, neutre et un peu cher au cœur, et de me déshonorer encore un peu plus en consacrant, et en douceur et en échelonnant, une somme équivalente prélevée sur mes gains au soulagement des détresses particulières. En ce cas, au lieu de ramener le chèque en France, d'où on n'aurait pas le droit de le sortir, il faudrait le faire diriger de là-bas vers Dublin. Sinon, fais-toi simplement remettre le chèque à verser éventuellement à un compte spécial à la Banque transatlantique, par exemple, où l'on me connaît. C'est tous les plans une situation où, quoi qu'on fasse, on aura eu tort. Ayons-le donc vite. Au moins, et n'en parlons plus. Je m'inquiète un peu que tu n'aies pas encore reçu l'invitation de Stockholm. Des réceptions, veux-tu m'envoyer un télégramme? Simplement reçu. Bien affectueusement, Sam.
Dear Jerome, as for the money, I don't know yet what we should do with it. I had dreamt up the bold scheme of giving the whole lot, and publicly too, so as to cut out the routine and other bourgeois fatuities, to the Trinity College Dublin Library, intellectual, neutral, not undear to my heart, and to dishonour myself still more by devoting, on the quiet and in stages, an equivalent amount drawn from my gains to the alleviation of personal misfortunes. In that case, instead of bringing the cheque back to France, where we would not have the right to take it out of the country, we would have to have it sent direct to Dublin. At every level, this is a situation where whatever we do will be wrong. Let's be wrong as soon as possible and have done with it. I'm a little concerned that you have not yet received the Stockholm invitation. As soon as you do, send me a telegram saying just received. Fond wishes, Sam.
And here we see in a letter to his friend and companion Barbara Bray how Beckett finds that there may indeed be a solution, a way out of the Nobel mess. He writes, mentioning the playwright Adamov, who as far as I've been able to ascertain was no great friend of Beckett's. This is on the 5th of December 1969, so shortly after the one to Jérôme.
Dear Barbara, Adamov's letter today. I have sent him the not inconsiderable trifle he asks. I feel very sorry for him, and I'm happy to be able to help him. Perhaps some sense will be made of Stockholm, after all. Struggle not to abandon work in absolute dark, as it shapes, I think, no future, but must keep going, and perhaps some stage run into something. Love, Sam.
One of the consequences of the Nobel is the much greater public interest in the man. He soon learns that there's going to be more than one person wishing to write his biography. Of course, Beckett's friends and family write to him to ask how they should react when they've been contacted by the first biographer, Deirdre Bair. Here is a letter typical of his response, this one to his cousin, Sheila Page, in Surrey, on the 2nd of February, my birthday, 2nd of February, 19, surprising how often I see that, 2nd of February 1974, from Paris to Surrey.
Dearest Ely, after a few brief meetings with Deirdre Bair, I made my position clear to her. 1, I was against the whole thing. 2, I personally would give her no information or help. 3, my family and friends were free to do as they pleased, and I would not try to influence them one way or another. 4, there was no point in our meeting, and I would not see her again. 5, I would not read her book when it appeared. This seemed to me the only possible attitude to take. Otherwise, I would have found myself in the impossible situation of having to control and, worse still, censor her material, passing this and barring that. There are lives worth telling for themselves and for the light they shed on the work. I do not find this the case with mine, which strikes me as an entirely irrelevant and uninteresting chore from beginning to end. Unfortunately, it is not copyright, and if Mrs. Bair does not make it public, someone else will, less scrupulous and well-intentioned perhaps than I believe her to be. Though she is not remarkable, from what I have been told, for strict veracity. She announces, for example, that this is an authorized life when she knows I deplore it, or that she sees me regularly when she does not at all. Nonetheless, I believe she is a decent woman trying to do a serious job, with as little scandal, gossip and innuendo and anecdote as possible. She seems to have interviewed everyone who ever heard of me. With regard to your question, it is answered by 3 above. To advise you would be to intervene, which I must not do. So do exactly as you please, dear Ely. I'm going through a dull, stupid spell, but I'm pretty well physically. I hope to get to Usi next week for a fortnight at least, though it is an effort managing alone. We have made no plans for travelling, but shall probably go somewhere next month, perhaps Tangier again. Forgive this endless screed. Hope not too illegible. Write soon yourself in better heart. Much love to all from us both. Sam.
Though he was once known as something of a hermit, nothing could be further from the truth of Beckett. He does not like publicity or the media, but he's deeply connected to a great number of friends, as I think you'll have gathered already. And he's particularly connected in his later life to many women friends who elicit from him some of his most interesting letters. And of course, his late work gives some of the greatest and most demanding roles to women in modern theatre. One thinks of Winnie in Happy Days or the Mouth in Not I. One of the women he's closest to is the theatre and film set designer Jocelyn Herbert. Here's a little exchange between them, and I'll do Jocelyn's response, where Beckett has to apologise for not being able to go over to England to visit Jocelyn at her farm, which is called Andrews in Hampshire, because of his he has cataract trouble with his eyes. This is the 6th of May, 1966, to Jocelyn in London from Usi.
Dear Jocelyn, I don't feel up to anything but to staying quietly. I saw the oculist, double cataract entre nous, one eye far advanced and nothing to be done about. The other less, and possibility of preventing it getting worse. Been given rather complicated treatment, local and general. Not only eyes, but all feels pretty dim. 4 months treatment, then back for another examination. No up if the right eye can be stabilized. Not hopeful, personally, but when was I ever about anything? Very disappointed, but really no choice. To go would be just kicking myself on. So she'll stay here till we go to Italy in June, if we do. I'm trying to get back to writing again. No dope like it. As the old charwoman said, following the street walker with her eyes, lovely work if you can get it. Cockney accent, autant que possible. Et voilà. I was so looking forward to Andrews.
Jocelyn Herbert replies in a letter from London, I wept when I saw your letter and still weep whenever I think about you, which is a lot of the time. Your poor eyes that look at once so brilliantly blue, falsely concealing such terrible damage. Please be hopeful about the one eye and try and save it. Naturally, in my idiotic female way, I want to come straight over to Usi just to be around in case you need anything. I know that this is the last thing you would want, especially if you've started writing and you need to be alone. I have been painfully learning this myself. Dashing all over the place, trying to escape an aching loneliness is just no use at all. It just gets worse. Somehow one has to face it deep inside oneself, and one can only do that alone. I've had a few days at the farm and thought a lot how good it would be when you were there too, but somehow knowing all the time that you would not come. So when I got back and found your letter, I was sad, but not surprised. Most important of all the women, at least for the correspondence, is Barbara Bray. We wish to read just a very short extract from a letter to her here. This is to Barbara Bray from just after the Nobel Prize has been awarded, and Beckett's on his way back home to Paris from Nabeul. He goes via Cascais in Portugal. This is the 16th of January 1970.
Dear Barbara, yours of 12th and 13th arrived yesterday and today. Don't be optimistic at me, for God's sake. The best you can do for me is to ask the minimum. I can't give what I haven't got, and I never had so little, except of this much of which herewith appellate. Love, Sam.
Beckett was never keen to explain or explicate his work, but as he ages, he's somewhat more relaxed about doing so, and even points towards sources, as here in another letter to Barbara Bray. The play that's forming in his mind will become Not I. The Caravaggio painting he mentions has completely captivated him, he saw when he was in Malta. This is on the 23rd of February 1972, to Barbara from Taroudon.
Dear Barbara, vague image for a short play of a lit face, mouth, with something to say, and a cloaked, hooded figure, sex unclear, completely still throughout, listening and watching. Latter suggested by an Arab woman, all hidden in black, absolutely motionless at the gate of a school in Taroudant, and by the watching figures in the Caravaggio Malta Decollation. Might produce 10 minutes strangeness if text found. Only glimmer of consciousness all this time. Love, Sam.
In these late years, Beckett can be, as we mentioned, surprisingly open, as in what follows. It's a letter to one Carlton Lake, who was the head of the great manuscript archive at the University of Texas in Austin. And Lake has asked Beckett, this is a quotation, why he had shifted from writing in English to writing in French. It's a question he was asked so often and very rarely answered it. Here he answers it. 3rd of October 1982.
Dear Carlton Lake, thanks for yours of September 23rd. Definite switch on return to Dublin, summer 1945, when Malloy begun, already in French poems and nouvelles. Escape from mother Anglo-Irish exuberance and automatisms, from excess to lack of colour. Distance from the writing, from which clearer to assess it. Slow down of whole process of formulation. Impoverished form in keeping with revelation and espousal of mental poverty. English grown foreign, resumable 10 years later. So on. Best, Sam Beckett.
I remember being surprised when, in 1985, I saw that Beckett had responded to the questionnaire put out by the French newspaper Libération, asking 100 internationally famous writers, "Pourquoi écrivez-vous?" Why do you write? With a bit of research, we discovered that he responded because the request was not made by Libération, but by Mathieu Landon, the son of his publisher, Jérôme Landon, and I hope he's here, he said he was, he is, who was working for Libération. So the question was, and it was very much, I can say the answer was very much in contrast to the long, full descriptions given by most writers. The question was, pourquoi écrivez-vous? And here's Beckett's response.
Cher Mathieu, bon qu'à ça. Affectueusement, Sam.
In English, why do you write?
Dear Matthew, answer, all I'm good for. Affectionately, Sam.
What this volume contains is a lot of leave-takings of one sort or another, and we'll soon be taking our leave as well. Not least with the fit and athletic man Beckett still is, almost despite himself, when the volume starts and he's 60 years old. So we see him in this letter we're about to read. He's 60 years old, he still has 24 years to live, and he's gone there for the funeral. He usually goes back for funerals of his sister-in-law. And he mentions Edward Beckett, his nephew, to whom he was very close and who at this time was already a professional flautist. The old course he refers to is the Carrick Mines golf course. This is to Barbara Bray, 31st of August 1966, from Dublin.
Dear Barbara, just to say all well with the dead. Back Saturday. Went round the old course this morning with Edward and the pro. Could just see the ball on the tee, never mind in the air. No kind of joy left there. people to see tomorrow and Friday. Edward driving me round, very old and helpless. What's left of the old lovely, familiar through the mist. Saw the beaten silver last night. Heard, waking in the night, that sea again. Just played, like my golf, Gluck with Edward. Alone now, with whiskey and room, were so often with the gone. On old boyhood French chair, all so veiled and shaky. Last time here. Love, Sam.
The turn towards the ghosts of the past is also a turn inwards as Beckett contemplates his own decline. When the volume opens, as I mentioned, he's 60 years old and he still has many years to live, and yet he already feels past it. He ends the first letter in our volume, a letter to his friend Jacob van Velde, with an invocation of recent deaths and his own sense of his own future. Devine is George Devine, Jocelyn Herbert's partner, the director of the Royal Court Theatre and of many of his plays. Giacometti is, of course, Alberto Giacometti, the artist to whom Beckett was close and who had died days before. So they both died in the last few weeks. So this is to Jacob van Velde, 25th of January, 1966.
Cher Tony, Giacometti mort, Georges Devine mort. Oui, conduis-moi au Père Lachaise en brûlant les feux rouges.
Dear Tony, Giacometti dead, George Devine dead. Yes, drive me to Père Lachaise and go straight through the red lights.
Beckett is contacted in the 1970s by one Lawrence Shainberg, who's written a book entitled Brain Surgeon, An Intimate View of His World, a book that fascinates Beckett. As you will see here, the loss of potency and even of lucidity is viewed by Beckett as a sort of apogee of his long-held aesthetic of failure and impoverishment. So this is responding to Shainberg's book about brain surgery and people who've lost their synapses. And this is from the 15th of July 1979 to Shainberg in New York from Paris.
Dear Mr. Shainberg, I received and read your book before your letter reached me. It impressed me strongly. I read it too fast and shall read it again. Mere decay is a paltry affair beside the calamities you describe. It is all I can speak of, and the ever acuter awareness of it, and the preposterous conviction formed long ago that here in the end is the last and by far best chance for the writer, gaping into his synaptic chasms. Forgive such poor private response to your book and letter. I am a poor hand at this form of communication. With all good wishes for your future work, yours very cordially, Sam Beckett.
As you may know, Beckett was born on Good Friday, the 13th of April in 1906. He has wonderful ways of countering the numerous cards and letters he receives with birthday wishes, as here in a letter to a book dealer and academic, Herbert Myron, who has sent his wishes. So this is on the 26th of April 1980 to Herbert Myron in Cambridge, Massachusetts, from Paris.
Dear Herbert, many thanks for your card of April 10th and kind remembrance. Birthdays after childhood are sad occasions, and I'm heartily glad this one is past again. I work on with failing mind, in other words, improved possibilities. Best ever, Sam.
And in a very similar vein, the same year to Frans Wurm, who had been a close friend of the poet Paul Celan, to Frans Wurm, 27th of April 1980, from Paris to Zurich.
Dear Frans Wurm, thank you for your card of April 11th and kind remembrance, and for poem, which I liked greatly. I try to think with what mind remains, that now is the time at last, the chance at last, in these remains, with those remains, though think is not the word, at last, not the word. So, yours confusedly, Sam Beckett.
And one more to Lawrence Schoenberg, this time with reference to his own late great text, Worstward Ho, to Lawrence Schoenberg, 7th of January 1983, from Ussy to New York.
Dear Larry, thanks for yours of December 19th. Better Worse, now entitled Worstward Ho, is with Grove, and I expect the proofs any day. Mercifully short. Now such inertia and void as never before. I remember an entry in Kafka's diary. Gardening. No hope for the future. At least he could garden. There must be words for it. I don't expect ever to find them. All best in whatever to come. Yours ever, Sam.
To his friend Kay Boyle, where the spaces between the words loom large, to Kay Boyle in Oregon on the 30th of July 1984, so 5 years before his death, from Paris.
Dear Kay, forgive silence. I grow dumber and dumber. Nothing to tell. Glad and sorry it's said and done. All the little. I think of you often, dear Kay. Love, Sam.
In his penultimate year, unable to keep his balance, Beckett retreats to an old folks' home, from where he writes to an American director of his plays, Robert Scanlon, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, on the 17th of December 1988, 1 year before his death.
Dear Bob Scanlon, thank you for yours of December 2nd. I'm still here with the down and not quite outs, receiving education in the lost art of keeping on my feet. I envy the quadrupeds. All good wishes for the new year. Yours ever, Sam.
And to conclude, in the last year of his life, an entirely typical late letter, again to Kay Boyle, which requires no commentary except to say that the refrain with which he ends is a popular Irish one to which he more and more frequently has recourse. So to Kay Boyle in Oakland, California, the 2nd of January 1989, from Paris.
Dear Kay, thanks for yours of Xmas Eve. Time, gentlemen, please, as they used to say in the Dublin pubs, coming up to 10 p.m. A hone, dead and not gone. Love, dear Kay. Sam.
Thank you.